So this is a unique kind of moment for me. I was deep into consciousness technologies, and even to some degree we kind of created a new product category of consciousness technologies back in the 90s when I had my company. And then, I really did leave it after I sold my company. I felt a need to change the channel. And so this is the first time I've come back into the consciousness technology world and offered a talk. So I feel as like, it's a little like going away from a place that you lived and coming back after a long period of time. So the way I got into it was that I had been actually serious spiritual practitioner. I had gotten involved in with a great spiritual teacher, Adi Da. Some of you may know who he is, and I was deeply involved for 15 years in that work. And I was married. My wife was also involved, and at a certain point, in our process of leaving the ashram, we sold everything we owned. We got a friend to pay our health insurance premiums, and we bought one-way tickets to Hong Kong. And we wandered for months in Southeast Asia, and during that time, we brought along with us a very simple tool. We named them biocircuits. It's something that our teacher had turned us on to. They're basically just two copper handles connected to two copper screens. And the way you use them is you lie with the one in your right hand underneath the base of your spine and the one in your left hand underneath the top of your spine. And it's quite remarkable. It provokes this, now we've quantified it. I'll let you know a little more about that. I ended up creating a double-blind study on it and sending it out for peer review. It basically just provokes a profound parasympathetic release. And given that we're all jacked up on caffeine, that's a really good thing. Essentially, it's a really good way to do a power nap. But while we were traveling in rural China, and then it happened again in a remote place in Burma, Leslie, who had a pretty sensitive liver, really got sick. And lying on the biocircuit, combined with me doing some laying on of hands, she just made it through these crises, and she decided to research this and write some sort of a pamphlet on it. These things are too cool. Nobody knows about them. Let's make this more known. And as she did her research, she encountered some stuff that made me get interested, and I was already a writer, so I joined in with her and we wrote a book. And, well, that's not the way to do it. How's that? There we go. Biocircuits. This book came out in, I think, 1987. And we discovered, however, that the guys that we knew who made biocircuits couldn't handle the volume, so we got in the business of making biocircuits, and we started a company called Tools for Exploration. And as soon as we started talking to the people who were interested in the biocircuits, we found ourselves in conversation with a lot of people. It was quite interesting. First, a little more about biocircuits. What we discovered is there were more than just that one configuration, that connecting hands to feet created certain effects, creating the top of the spine to the bottom of the spine created certain effects. We found that we could create sensations that people could pretty consistently feel. The copper biocircuits made sense to most of us. Not the silk ones, though. You could actually create some effects that I could feel. In terms of gaining sensitivity, we thought of it as sensitivity to the life energy. Now, there are a lot of different paradigms that people use to explain their experience, and the electrical connection that we were getting from the copper makes, a certain kind of sense. The silk doesn't really provide that in the same way. But there were sensations of energy movement that made it interesting. So anyway, we sold, that book we wrote sold 30,000 copies. We sold over 10,000 copper biocircuits and quite a few silk biocircuits over this period of time that we had the company. There were all kinds of varieties of ways that they were used. We had pages in our catalog about all of that. And as I mentioned, I hired Julian Isaacs. He's actually a biofeedback practitioner doing something like what Grant was inviting people to do, more involved in his practice on helping people improve cognitive function, focus, their peak performance and remedial applications. He's really, quite into that. But the great thing about him was that he was an experienced researcher who knew how to design a proper study. So what we did is we embedded the biocircuits in blankets, and some of them weren't connected, and some of them were connected wrong, and so we had 3 conditions, and we had a huge effect size. I funded the thing, and with a relatively small budget, I was able to do sufficient stuff that I thought the effect was big enough that it would show, and it was enormous. We got it published, peer-reviewed journal. So that was what I was into. But once we began selling these things, we began encountering people who were using sound and light machines, who were using cranial electrostimulation, who had read Michael Hutchison's book, Megabrain, which had only come out a few years before. And the beginnings of the consciousness hacking world were beginning to come together. This is in the late 80s. So I began to say, okay, well, if I'm shipping all these biocircuits out, maybe we should sell some other stuff. And we put out our first catalog. And it was a homely little affair. It was, I think, the first catalog we did had 16 pages. And it was brown and white, brown and beige on the inside. That's the last copy. That's why it has my initials in the corner. We don't have any other copies left. As I got into that, it turned out that Michael Hutchison also lived in Marin County. I got to know him, and he drew me into what he was into. So I became the co-editor and partner in his publication, Megabrain Report, and we interviewed a variety of scientists and hackers and wrote articles and reviewed books and reviewed products. And, well, you'll see there's more of that. And so tools for exploration began to grow. I began to get interested in what I realized was that I was convinced through my own experience of higher samadhis that these awakenings shifted the locus of identity and the place from which we could operate, and it also improved cognitive function in ways that made the future of human consciousness crucial to what was going to happen next in creating the changes in the world as a whole. And it seized my imagination. My goodness, the crossroads between technology and consciousness, what an exciting place to hang out. I really wanted to help make that happen. It was a discovery of a juicy place to participate. And I also found it interesting one of the things that I got some amusement out of were these catalog covers that we did. I would hire artists or whoever to create these covers. And what began to happen was that a community began to arise. These consciousness hackers would occasionally meet with one another, but there wasn't much of a community. But in the pages of this catalog, because I put in pictures of researchers and designers of devices and people who had created a particular kind of recording, it was the beginnings of the more sophisticated approaches to binaural technology. The community kind of found itself in the pages of the catalog. And we were creative with these covers. And we kept publishing Megabrain Report. There were, I think, 6 issues that Michael and I put out during that time. And he had a company himself that he had created around the same time that I had created Tools for Exploration, just separately. And then that wasn't really working out so well, so he folded his company into ours, and we had the Hutchison Guide within the pages of our catalog. He helped kind of introduce all that stuff. And we tried to go a little bit more mainstream, and we designed different kinds of covers. I eventually decided to continue to be creative, however, And we had a lot of fun. A lot of my favorite, you can see, let's see, over there at the top, you've got everybody from Gangaji to Bodhidharma to Rene Descartes, Mother Teresa, and then we did an outtake where we were singing, and here we have Ken Wilber peering over my shoulder. I was into him already. Alan Watts, Jerry Garcia. Well, you can see it was the 90s, and we continued a lot. This was 10 years of catalogs, and I didn't put them all in. What I was into doing partly was creating an actual community that could put these things out. So I had a letter to the customers. This is me back in the 90s when I had hair, and we presented ourselves as a company that was devoted to this experience. We had people who were really expert. Julian Isaacs was on the phone helping people who were buying their EEG devices. We had people who really knew the stuff, and we were a place where the person who was just discovering this could actually begin to have their first conversations. And so the innovators of these technologies would contact me, and I had the experience of having people come all the time. This is the index of one of the catalogs. It's not even the last of the catalogs, but you can get a feeling that there were 1,000 products in this catalog. It became a big thing. We had a small crew. I think at the end I only had 15 employees when I sold the business. And we had various product categories. The biggest product category, still to this day, I think, was the light and sound machines, the flashing lights and goggles with binaural beats, sometimes combined with some sort of musical tracks. There were zillions of those. And probably the other most significant product category were the cranial electrostimulation devices. Here's just one random page. I actually got a pharmacy license and sold the AlphaStim device, which was a medical device. But there were a wide variety of products. For instance, lucid dream technology. This doesn't show the actual machines, but we sold machines created by Stephen LaBerge that would sense the REM and give you a little signal so that you could develop that ability with that signaling from a device. And we sold a full complement of ordinary biofeedback devices. Here we've got a muscle tension, temperature biofeedback. This back in the pre-iPhone days, a random vibrator that would remind you for whatever practice it was you wanted to be reminded of. And here are a couple of the more obscure early home EEG devices. People who would really hack their own brains needed an EEG device, and the early EEG devices we carried. I went to the Winter Brain Symposia, and there was a little community around neurofeedback back in the mid-late 90s that I was a participant in. Yeah, okay. Ganzfeld devices, many of the experiments in intuition or any kind of paranormal capacities use a Ganzfeld device to get people into a state. A Ganzfeld is where your eyes are open, but there is nothing in, it's a featureless field with even illumination. So we had those. We played with other visual devices, even these, some people were playing with color therapy with tinted glasses. We sold sound tables. This was an exciting thing because I think this was less than $500, and the early ones were several thousand. And of course, there were the auditory stimulation devices that mostly used binaural beats, like the HemiSync of the Monroe Institute. So we carried the devices through which people could create those signals, and we helped teach people how to apply them, and how to create subliminals even. We had devices for that. Michael Hutchison designed a line of tapes. I even got into the act, and we did some research on these when we created them. I combined some of the Tomatis work, using really high quality recordings of chamber music as an aspect of some of those recordings. It wasn't only the binaural beats. And we expanded into other product categories that really weren't consciousness technology, like there was a lot of early awareness of the potential bioelectric effects. And this is one of the things that was most exciting to me, by the way, is we'd all gotten high with drugs, but the beginnings of getting high with devices opened up an awareness of us as biophysical rather than merely biochemical beings. And this paradigm shift into biophysics from merely biochemistry felt to me hugely significant. There are a lot of things that can be said about that. Maybe Mikey and I will get into that when we talk later. And we carried kind of more conventional things, just really interesting, high quality, and hard to get. That was kind of our specialty. You're beginning to get the feeling, I enjoyed this because I felt that I was creating mail order catalog as Dada art. That was my creative expression. The fact that you could actually order all this stuff and it would come. For instance, the Egeli wheel created, we ordered these from Hungary. There's a very, very lightweight little, almost like a mylar wheel that was on this, that was balanced in this very even way. And when you held your hand by it, it would turn. And the theory, according to the creator, was the more life force was coming out of your hands, the more you could turn the Egeli wheel. It's just an example of some of the wild stuff. We at one point, it wasn't in the catalog I was sampling these pages from, we sold a course in how to learn to see auras that included aura goggles that were supposed to help you learn to see auras. I tested all these things. There wasn't anything that was completely, well, let's put it this way. Everything that we carried either had something to substantiate it, or it was already famous and had a following. There were some things that I thought were charlatan products, but they already had such a following, like the Tesla watch I thought was bullshit. Not the idea of the Tesla watch.
What's the Tesla watch?
The Tesla watch was a Schumann resonance generator built into a watch. It was just a very poorly made one, but it was a famous one that had a lot of people, people would call us wanting it. So we sold, in the last year I was in business, we sold something like $2.5 million worth of these kinds of products. Back when $2.5 million was a lot of money. This is a long time ago. And we also sold a lot of books. I sold books by Ken Wilber, who you heard from last time the consciousness hacking group met, Peter Russell. The ideas of evolution. You may have noticed that Sgt. Pepper's cover had this phrase, jump aboard the evolutionary bandwagon. For me, this purpose of evolving consciousness was always front and center, the sense of that as an inspired possibility. So although I was aware of the difference between rigorous, evidential, measurable effects, scientific effects, and the more woo-woo things, I felt that there was something, particularly because we began with a product whose best explanation had to do with life energy movement, that I wanted to straddle that. I didn't want to just stay with the strictly mainstream, scientifically acceptable products. The things that interested me most had to do, like this is a device I actually designed together with Julian and one of our manufacturers. It was the first breath-based feedback device. What we did is we had a tone that you could set that would draw, through which you could, if you regulated your breath to this, you could be taken through a whole variety of different pranayama type techniques. We could take you into just the simple, 10-second the breath cycle that is associated like with the heart math work, which was the other thing I was really turned on to. I loved what was going on at Heart Math. I became closely involved with those folks. And I actually ended up being hired by them to be the project manager when they finally created their first heart rate variability feedback monitor. They have a product now called the M-Wave, but it's the evolute of this freeze framer device, which is their first device. I introduced them to the Russian guy who understood the waveform algorithms enough to design the original version of their technology. Today, I don't use this stuff much anymore. I OD'd on consciousness technology. I got frustrated. I felt at the end that my whole reason for getting into it was an excitement about making a difference in the world and right livelihood. And I began to feel that there were problems with the whole psychology of my customers. People who weren't eating right, exercising regularly, meditating, were trying to find the magic frequency that was going to make them be healed or whatever. I was filling other people's closets with junk they weren't using. I was incentivized by the necessities of having payroll to meet every couple of weeks or so to try to move more widgets. I didn't want to move more widgets. I wanted for people to wake up more. And I began to feel that I was a prisoner of some patterns in the industry that were a problem. That once somebody had gone through all the work to tool up and create a device, they had to advocate for that device and that approach. And I began to feel that the consciousness technologies that I was able to sell were the crude stone axes and proto-tools of a wonderful technology that was a long way into the future. I began to feel that the self-responsibility, the auto-regulation, the tried and true ancient stuff was more the point. Early this morning, I floated. I still use that technology. Just a few days ago, I used a biocircuit. I still use that technology. There's nothing like it. We are in a hyper-caffeinated world. This is a technology I doubt many of you people know about. As you know, the consciousness hacking probably doesn't go to this. So I want you to know how you can get one or make one. This is totally, you can buy the stuff and make this thing yourself for, I don't know, probably not more than 50 bucks, probably 30 bucks. But you can also get one, and I hope you'll note down or try to just remember Screens for Life. Because if you email this fellow, he's kind of low-tech, Donald Brown, screensforlife@gmail.com, you can get a pair of biocircuits for, I don't know, 150 bucks, I think. He makes great biocircuits. I use, you know, the ones I used to manufacture, I've ruined all mine because I use them. So this pair I held up is one that Donald makes. And yeah, thanks, Mikey. So that's what he makes. And I highly recommend it because there's two reasons to use it. One is almost everybody in our society is not just sleep deprived, but tending to run on a certain hyped energy, and evoking a powerful parasympathetic effect is, yeah, sure. Be careful with it though. Yeah, well, yeah, no, actually, I don't think I want it handed around, no, but you know, you're welcome to take a look. The weak spot in these is the place where they're soldered into the screens. And if people are holding them by the screens and stuff, they eventually wear out after a few years. The reason I think that this is so valuable is that many of you probably get acupuncture treatments, and you know how on the acupuncture table sometimes you'll find yourself going into this sort of deep parasympathetic zone. That effect that you get from an acupuncture treatment is that's the same thing. That's what this produces. And in fact, there's something that's used by particularly Japanese acupuncturists. We write about this in the book. They call them ion pumping cords. It's where needles are clipped to one another. Sometimes a current is put through those needles, But more frequently, they're just connected to one another. There's an external circuit. And those ion pumping cords in 2 distal acupuncture needle points are a biocircuit. It's a different form of biocircuit. This connection of circuits in the body, external to the body, is what a biocircuit is. So anyway, I encourage you who are tinkerers, this is one that does something really different from everything else that's entirely healthy and good for you. I hope you'll turn on to biocircuits. I still believe in them. Our book is out of print, but I think that if you go online and you search in a resourceful enough way, there's somebody who put up a bootleg PDF of the book and you can read it online. But of course, I went in another direction. I ended up getting out of the business in order to focus on what I felt was really primary, which is practice, personal responsibility. So it was only a few years after I'd sold the business. I took a little time right away to undo the Doonesbury character I had become. I was the guy in Doonesbury who sells stress reduction devices, but who's all stressed out because he's in a startup business. I got out of that and I chilled for a while. But after a year or so of just chilling, I got involved with Ken Wilber and the Integral Institute, and we developed Integral Life Practice. And the work I do now extends from that. In my view, all of life is practice. Every moment is an opportunity for choice. You're always choosing and practicing something. Neurons that fire together wire together. You might be practicing being skeptical. You might be practicing being bored. You might be practicing being resentful or anxious or whatever. You're going to tend to be more that way in future moments. You're always practicing. And every area of life is a domain of practice. The mind, the body, the psyche, spirit, your relationships, your citizenship in the world. And in my teaching, this issue of how we as practitioners are creating our world together has become my focus. The link between personal practice and social responsibility seems to me to be becoming more and more urgent. We all are aware that it's kind of a hair-raising time here on the planet, and our own contributions to sanity are becoming more and more crucial, and where that comes from is crucial. They're interwoven. You can't be an effective activist if you are not doing the inner work, but you can't do the outer work. You can't do the inner work effectively in a really meaningful way if you don't ultimately find a way to be of benefit to the whole system you're a part of. So that's the direction of my focus now. There's some interesting issues that came forward for me over time. I came to not like the brain driving technologies. I don't like sound and light machines anymore. The reason I don't like them is because they drive a rhythm in the brain. And I don't think the endogenous rhythm of the brain, that, when I generate my alpha or theta wave pattern or my harmonized pattern endogenously, that's a different thing than when it's driven by an external input. And I think equating those things naively it was very common back in my day. I couldn't seem to get through to anybody about that difference. And I was financially disincentivized from being too strenuously loud about it, I guess. So those were the kinds of issues that led me to kind of exit that world. But I've had a very fruitful and humorous conversation with Mikey. There's a tremendous creativity and idealism in this room, I know, and the world of consciousness hacking has sprouted all kinds of new creative potentials that I don't know about. And so I'm excited to talk with you, Mikey, and with anybody else who wants to talk about all these interesting issues.
Hey, Terry.
Hey, man.
Come over here. Thank you. That was like a magical mystery tour through the history of consciousness hacking. So, and
the early days.
The early days, yeah. This is actually exciting for me because we've had a couple short conversations, but we haven't really had a chance to really dialogue. So I guess this is a fun place to do it. So your arc is that you really kind of drank the Kool-Aid in a way, and you kind of got into the Kool-Aid bath, and you really were one of the biggest providers of these types of technologies in the world. And then you had kind of an OD, and you left that world, and you really sort of got back to traditional practice. And so now there's this sense that I have, and maybe I'm inside of a kind of a little bubble, but the bubble seems to be getting bigger, that people are really coming back to this idea. And they are really interested in ways that technology can be supporting, this is wireless and it never works, ways that technology can be supporting transformation in a meaningful way. And so my question for you is this for you like, uh-oh, danger, this is like a bad idea and you're gonna repeat the same mistakes that happened again and you should just avoid this path? Or do you think this is a kind of a certain cautions, or are you excited about this new frontier? What's your perspective on it?
Well, I kind of have a lot of perceptions that span the spectrum you're describing. At one end, I think that the fascination with the technology is self-reinforcing in a way that creates an optical illusion. Because the tech can do something to our consciousness, and some of it's kind of cool, and it's doing something pretty good, well, it can be improved, and let's just, it's in itself fascinating. We're in a world in which scientific and technological discoveries are remaking the world. We're explorers, we're psychonauts, we're exploring consciousness. Technology ought to be able to create incredible breakthroughs, but there may be some very deep patterns in our own psyches that cause us to reach for the extrinsic thing is going to do it to me, when the thing that's really going to be meaningful is what I generate myself. And this is why I teach practice and teach a life of practice. And I feel just so aligned to that, because that's, when I'm screwing up, that's what I need to do. I need to practice. I don't need to put on a pair of goggles. And that orientation to self-responsibility is at the heart of what really matters. On the other hand, I think that ultimately there might be, I would hope that there will be, certain breakthroughs that will be richly valuable. At least, there already are things that really can help people with certain cognitive deficits or learning disabilities, a variety of things, particularly neurofeedback. On the other hand, I think it's kind of wasteful. I think that there are enough technological interventions that are a little wide of the mark, that don't really produce that much benefit, that eat up a lot of resources. In a time in which the human footprint on the planet, the fact that our lifestyles are part of a process by which we seem to be on a collision course with some pretty serious problems. If you're at all sophisticated about climate science or species extinctions or all the rest of it, we're in the midst of an ecological emergency, and focusing on what might be marginal improvements in people's cognitive function at the expense of consuming thousands of dollars, and and a lot of the tech is, it's creating certain kinds of damage. I think we ought to be reflective. I think we ought to really make sure that what we're getting involved in really has value. And I think we ought to also recognize that the idea, people always end up hyping what they're able to create. Once you invest the time and energy, what you find has got to be worthwhile. And so you become an advocate for whatever you've found. And even if its benefit is kind of small, the size of the distraction from what might be more relevant and fundamental endeavors, it breeds a kind of myopia. So I think I'd offer mainly that caution. I think there's totally legitimate stuff to be doing with tech.
So, yeah, totally hear you, and I think everything you're pointing to can very fairly be pointed to, meaning I think that these are things that we can see. The thing that I couldn't help but hear when you were talking was it felt like almost every single thing you said could also be said with regards to the more traditional spiritual marketplace, right? Essentially every single point, almost like on a bullet point list, in the sense that people just as much look to practice and this teacher or this tradition as being the thing that's going to finally fix them. And you see all kinds of people that are shopping 2 years in this tradition, 2 years in that tradition.
The craving mind is endlessly creative, and it finds its objects everywhere.
And so I'm wondering if what you're pointing to is not actually a quality of technology, but actually a quality of, let's say, our cultural context. And that regardless of the pointer, there is this propensity to look outward for our salvation, and we'll find whatever
I think that valid spiritual teachings always direct people back to their practice and to their self-responsibility. Right. I think that the tendency to idealize and look for something outside yourself ends up operating in those environments, and teachers try to bind people to themselves. I mean, there's a lot of unhealthy dynamics that go on in traditional meditative, and not all of it is even necessarily spiritual. Some of it's completely atheistic and technical, but still everything has its own momentum, and it tends to bind people to the paradigm out of which it's working in a way that is understandable. Yeah. It's not like any of that's evil.
Right.
Those inefficiencies are unavoidable, but the thing with the technology is, when we're hyping the technology, the sense that, oh, when I get this thing, when I buy this thing, or when I make this thing, or when I have this thing done to me, something magic is going to happen to me. Right. I found that it was pervasive back in the 90s. I suspect that it's a more sophisticated world now.
Well, maybe not, but I guess to hear what you said, this almost inherent contradiction between marketing something that ultimately is fundamentally always here and always present and can never be attained or lost. It's a fundamental contradiction. Yeah. And that contradiction seems to be true regardless of the domain that you're in, whether you're in the domain of traditional spirituality or you're in the domain of technology. And so for me, what these things feel more like are design problems rather than fundamental problems. And so I wonder, to kind of get your take on it, my sense of the challenge that we have here is really about shifting the paradigm, shifting the way in which we create these technologies and the intention behind the technologies. So as you mentioned, any good spiritual teacher points back to your own responsibility and, I don't remember the exact words you used, but something like your own present moment experience, right? And even if the student gets swayed and confused and if that's the guru and that's the way, and, they'll have these illusions, but it's the teacher's job to always point back to that, right? And so my question or my interest, my excitement is, can that be the job of technology? And to continue as a design challenge, to always develop better and better and better and better ways of doing that. And to notice, as literally part of how you evaluate your product as a company, to say, oh, looks like people are forming new attachments. It looks like people are actually, more suffering is being created. That's a failure of the product. The product needs to be redesigned, recreated, and we need to have new scientific measures which really focus deeply on presence, awakening, connection, the things that really matter in terms of.
Well, that would be good, but it was my observation of the industry when I knew it that the incentives, people were spending a very significant part of their budget, probably as much or even more on marketing as they were on R&D. And once you've invested in the tooling, you kind of have to.
Yeah.
So the marketing does not say, hey, you've just got to be responsible. You know, it tries to create the sense of the
need
of the beautiful bauble that you really, really want, the elixir, the special thing that's going to do a magic on you. And so and I think that pertains also to the marketing of spiritual teachings. It's not as if it's only operating in the domain of the technology. But I think that we tend to see that, I remember feeling, hey, this is right livelihood. They're paying their, whatever it is, $100, and I'm shipping them a $100 product that's, you know, we never marked anything up above its retail, you know, the sense of that being lawful. And the sense then, okay, I'm getting this tool has this value. But how we quantify what the real value of that is, and how much that's reinforcing an attitude of, like, I just see a different attitude in somebody who's wanting to learn to meditate than in somebody who's buying the device in order for it to do it to them. It tends to breed that in a way that I found that distinction crucial. It became very important to me personally. And I'm excited that, you know, you're so obviously sincere, bright, and, you know, you get these things, you care about the same things. And I can see that the field has evolved. And by no means am I looking askance at you and the consciousness hacking group. You're sharing an enthusiasm that I gave 10 years of my life to. So obviously I can relate to it. But these design problems ended up making me feel, wait, I just want to invest my energy in a different place. I really want to be emphasizing the personal responsibility. And the other thing was, I think that I kind of screwed myself up with some of the technologies at times. I think there was a certain amount of dysregulation from the CES and the Light and Sound. Those were the most popular products. And I don't think those were great. I found myself enthusiastic for a little while and then, you know, kind of going through with my purification of my system from these exogenous inputs. I don't even think they were particularly good for me.
I don't even really use technology. So.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't recommend them anymore.
Yeah.
You know, certain limited use of CES, really good quality CES, for a period and then getting off it, yes, certainly, especially when in addiction recovery, yes. Yeah. But the very limited and targeted use of all these technologies, particularly, you know, the reason I think that the Holosync and, you know, those recordings really, really work in this way. If I spend, you know, back in the days, you know, if it was $200, I think. If I spend that $200 on this set of CDs, I'm damn well going to use them every day. So I actually sit and I meditate for an hour or a half an hour once or twice a day. And so the talismanic effect that I've made the investment gets me to sit, then it works. Now maybe, you know, a lot of it is, you do get a real effect. It does change your state somewhat, but I think the benefits people got were as significantly from the fact that they were meditating. And what I didn't like, I mean, when Bill Harris had Centerpoint, he would say, oh, you can just listen to them even and fall off asleep. No, it's not the same. And I felt that the field as a whole, because it has to be self-financing, ends up having to create a certain amount of hype because there's got to be a lot of marketing. And I think the marketing, I mean, I did marketing. That was what my business was. I was a marketer of these things. I tried always to be an educator. And ultimately, I wanted to educate people to have a wise and somewhat skeptical relationship.
Well, I think there's a huge amount to learn from everything that you've been through. And I think there's no question in anybody's mind that technology can and does have an incredibly detrimental effect everything. I mean, the atomic bomb is a technology, right? I mean, really, there's no question technology can hurt people. So I don't think that's a question in anyone's mind. And I think technologies designed for the purpose of helping people can also hurt people, right? And the marketing around the technology can even hurt people. And I think that there's a number of important lessons that I think come from this sort of past cycle of trying to create these technologies and ways that they did indeed fail, that I think we can learn from and we can actually try to do it better. And I think for me, a lot of these there are design challenges. It's about looking at how can you actually design new ways of marketing? How can you actually create technology that has a deeper, a more of a skillful approach to actually fostering the kind of effects that you care about.
And I think it's a holism. It's got to do with a somewhat more organic and holistic. That's why the technologies that I still use are very low tech.
Right.
You know?
And so on the holistic side, the thing that I can't get past is this idea that actually the cultural context that we're in itself is fractured, is not integrated. We have something on this side that we call science and technology, and something on this side that we call traditional practice. And even in your life, you sort of OD'd on this side and swung over to this other side. And I think that itself is evidence of this chasm between the two. And this incredible potential that exists right now is actually to explore how this really potent and powerful aspect of human creation that we call science and technology, how can that actually be a tool for collective awakening? And that doesn't mean it's easy, and that doesn't mean it doesn't have its pitfalls, but if it could be...
If it could be, it would be great, but I think it's important. I bought that so damn hard. I was a, yeah, right on! I mean, I wish the younger me would have been your best friend. I was totally inside it, man.
You could be my best friend, too.
But what we end up, we've got to find our way to an appreciation that we're really still, I suspect, at a pretty early stage. A few of these technologies may be substantially way ahead of where they were when I left off just before 2000. But I really did feel that we were, many generations of radical improvement needed to take place before the technologies would become as radically interesting to me as they offered more sizzle than steak. I got more excited by my vision of what I wanted them to be than I felt improved by what they actually were. And I suspect that differential tends to haunt the industry still to some significant degree. So I think, if we don't want to deplete the innovation completely because we'll never get to something better, but in the meantime, to what degree are we, what are our real motives? If I'm an engineer and I'm kind of getting into meditation and I kind of want to put these two parts of my life together, it's more about me feeling an integration and, I'm going to do something interesting. But if it isn't actually creating a benefit for the end user, you're working out your life purpose and you're not necessarily being of benefit. And so being a little more self-critical, I think, is important.
Yeah. I think that I wouldn't say that the technology has advanced in some incredible way since the days of your catalog. There are some interesting devices out there, but it's not like I can sit here and say these are the technologies that are catalyzing a collective awakening in some way. But I also can't help but think that there's a sort of an imperative, and that imperative is that we talked a little bit about this. It's going to be a pretty short amount of time, 5 to 10 years probably, that we have, for example, augmented reality that is so viscerally real that when we're inside of it, we actually won't be able to tell the difference between real reality and the virtual reality, and we'll have fully immersive virtual environments that are going to be so engaging, so profoundly immersive, that we're going to have like IVs and, you know, what are those things called you pee into? This bladder? I mean, that will probably become a big
You mean
marketplace.
people are going to disappear into the VR so much that they're just going to tube themselves up and stay there?
So meaning these
Whoa.
meaning the technology will be so profoundly engaging that it will hold human attention in ways we've never seen on this planet. And as you said, because we are creating the most powerful attentional attractors to ever exist. And as you said, what wires together fires together. In each moment we are training something, right? In each moment we are training, and this question of what is it that we're training? And as we create these technologies that are so profoundly engaging that they are literally sucking in our attention onto something, the imperative is that, and I can't help but feel, that if that technology is not supporting self-awareness in a skillful way,
It's
then
going to
we're
be
sort of
supporting
screwed.
a lack of awareness.
It's going to be supporting the opposite. And so it's actually, it's not just a luxury, it's actually really important for perhaps the survival of our species.
Well, you know, that reminds me of something. Actually, those of you who signed my mailing list, if after, you know, you'll get an email from me at some point, probably, you know, announcing some program I like or some teaching I'm offering or something. You can hit reply to that email and write in Supernormal stimuli. I have an online little set of emails that I send out, a little e-course in supernormal stimuli. You probably know what they are, I don't know, but the basic idea, evolutionary theory, is that this is observed in animals. Certain birds that sit on blue speckled eggs will reject their own eggs in favor of a bigger, bluer, more obviously speckled version of the egg. It's a supernormal stimulus of the thing they're trained to. You've got certain insects that will mate with a paper version of the opposite sex of their species that has the exaggerated virtues that they're hardwired to look for. Well, human beings have reversed engineered our innate drives. So even the simplest things like salting our food or having plentiful sugar available, you know, these were our hardwired drives, were for salt and sugar and concentrated calories and protein and so forth. And now in this environment, we are all dealing with problems of obesity and, you know, the so-called diseases of kings of a few hundred years ago are the things that are killing most of us today. Pornography, refined drugs, refined alcohol, and those things drove the development of Western culture. We settled the New World looking for silk and spices. You know, it was supernormal stimuli of various kinds. So I think there's a potential for technology. Technology is already a supernormal stimulus. The fast cuts in TV editing are stimulating our orienting response, you know, our visual orienting response. They're because ratings drive it, whatever it is that will grab our attention is what we get. And what we end up with is a fragmented attention span and a diminishment of our own well-being through our immersion in media that's good at grabbing our attention. We actually, to a very significant degree, do have to take personal responsibility. We have to fight back to regain our wholeness in the face of all these supernormal stimuli. It's like a design problem. Whatever we're hardwired to respond to, we're now getting so smart that we can give each other a whole lot of it and kind of, you know, like puppets on a string, we can manipulate each other and we can make money that way. And that's the way the marketplace drives this. So understanding that we're living in a sea of supernormal stimuli and beginning to regain some actual autonomous control and a kind of appreciation for your need for quiet. You know, this is why the parasympathetic response, the relaxation response, is the thing I reach for it most. I'm in this culture like everybody else, We're all busy, we're all under deadline, you know. But I would tend to emphasize that. So I agree that there's something important there, and I think that I'm serving my function by not backing down completely, even though I love where you're coming from. And I think you're right, that the power of the technology is going to tend to take us in some negative directions if we don't consciously design them as you're intending to. And I really appreciate your leadership and imagination in doing it. I love what I'm hearing from you.
Well, with that, no.
We nailed it!
Actually, we do have to end it. So thank you,
Yeah,
Terry. This has been
thank
excellent.
you.
So what we're going to do is Terry.